managing FAAB, and navigating the waiver wire in the month of August. Plus, an in-depth discussion on the ethics of playing hard down the stretch, even if you are out of contention of winning. Baseball HQ Radio's Patrick Davitt joins us next on Beat the Shift. Welcome to another episode of the Beat the Shift podcast. I am your host, Ariel Cohen, and with me as always, Ruvain Guy. How are you, Ruvain?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. Trade deadline has passed us. Our Mets got Javier Baez, 5 strikeouts today, but he did have a crucial home run the other day to win the game. Are you excited about, just about the Mets, are you excited about the trade deadline? What a crazy day that last day was on Friday.
I think it was one of the most active trade deadlines I can remember. I wish the Mets would have done more because they do need pitching, and I don't think Javi Baez actually addresses that. But again, there's nothing that can replace the Jacob deGrom.
Yeah, that's we're still waiting for him to get healthy. I guess throwing 100 miles an hour as your average is it takes a toll on the body, I guess. But we're optimistic here, and hopefully the Mets will still be in it and make the playoffs. Well, we've got a fantastic guest tonight. He's been on our show before. He is the host of the Baseball HQ Radio show. Please welcome Patrick Davitt. How are you, Patrick?
I'm doing fine, thanks, Ariel. Thank you for inviting me. It's really exciting to have another chance to talk with you guys.
Likewise. And let's jump right into it. In our strategy section tonight, going to talk a little bit about FAAB, a little bit about the waiver wire as you're mining the rest of your season. Some trade deadlines and leagues have come and passed, so FAAB is really the only thing you can do to improve your roster at this point. So just let's talk generally. How, Patrick, do you generally distribute your FAAB dollars throughout the fantasy season?
Well, it depends on the format of the league. I play in a couple of leagues. Well, I play in 3 leagues. One has no FAAB at all. It's a draft and hold. Then I'm in an American League only in the Tout American League, and that has crossover potential. There's a possibility at the start of the year that at the deadline you're going to see some National Leaguers come over, and of course that's what happened this year in a big way. And then in mixed leagues, there's no crossover potential. So let's start there. I just divide my 1,000 units into 40 units a week times 26 weeks. And then anything I don't spend, I don't deliberately go out and spend 40 units every week just to spend it. I kind of look and see and calibrate and spend what I think I need to get. And anything that I've got left over in week 1, I just pile it into week 2. And anything left over after that piles into week 3. And so on down towards the end. And I always find that I have, by the end, I have unspent money, 80 or 90 units. And I think that's about where you want to end up. I don't want to get caught empty-handed at the end in September because I may have to make an emergency replacement. But at the same time, I don't see any point in hoarding money because there's nothing to hoard it for. In the American League only, I put about usually 50 to 60% I set aside for the trade deadline. And then I divide the rest before the trade deadline into smaller units. But we have 0 bidding. You can acquire players in that league with no bid. You can bid 0 and still get players. So the money that you have in that pre-deadline pool actually stretches a little farther because a lot of times, especially given the talent that's available in a shallow free agent pool like that, there's not hardly ever anybody you want to spend money on anyway, so it's $1 here, a 0 bid there, and it actually stretches pretty nicely. And then you get to the deadline and you hope to have the hammer or enough money that you can get in on one of the really good guys. And this year I didn't because I was really, really in bad trouble in middle infield, so I spent really heavily, about 300 units to get Taylor Walls of Tampa when he first came up, because I just didn't want to get outbid, and I needed that middle infielder terribly. It didn't work out for me that well, and I ended up having about the 5th or 6th most at the deadline, and there was 5 players that you would have wanted, so it didn't actually help me that much. I think I've got the most or second most now, if anything happens like a big call-up that we're not expecting. But basically, I think I'm just going to be, churning the free agent pool as best I can in that league.
Yep. Ruvain?
I try to have about 45 to 50% of my FAB when it comes to the trade deadline. I want to make sure that I have enough money to make those pickups because usually at the end you want to get those two-star pitchers. Those two-star pitchers can be pretty pricey in September, and you want to make sure you get the ones that you really want. Also, I try to keep track of how much FAB everyone else has in the league. I want to try to be, I want to make sure that if I have that 500, let's say $500 left in whatever it is, I want to make sure that it's not too much comparative to the rest of the league. You want to make sure that you're not underspending at the same time, but you also have to see how much people are spending during the course of every week because that varies from week to week, and you should base it on that. But I really like having as much money as I can toward August and September because that's when I get the two-star pitchers, and I want to have that hammer.
Yeah, and I put this question out very generally, but the truth is that it really matters what kind of league you're in and whether leagues allow the the $0 bid, right? If you're in a league that only has $100 FAB for the year with no zeros allowed, well, then you're going to have to hold a little bit more before the end of the season. If you're in a mono league, you need a budget for, just as Patrick said, for that trade deadline acquisition. Otherwise, you need to apportion, some units per week for the regular grind and save a little bit to have the hammer at the end. We focus a lot on the show here on mixed leagues that are rotisserie. I generally, I mean, there's no general, but I like to have about 2/3 of the FAB on the first half of the season, 1/3 to the last half. Definitely have at least 10% going to your last month. But as Ruvain said, it really depends on what the other teams are doing. See where you are in terms of spend as the season goes on. If you have $100 more than the next person, you're probably not spending enough for the needs that you have already. If you've only got $50 left and most of the teams have $300, obviously you're in a pinch. So you want to make sure that you're somewhere in the middle of the pack. And me, like Ruvain, I like being towards the top. If you're in a league that has playoffs, you want to spend a little bit less earlier on and really save that for the playoffs. Obviously, if you're in last place and you need to spend what you can just to get into the playoffs, but if you're doing well and you're looking like you're in position, you want to spend so that you're going to be able to pick up those guys, anybody you want in the playoffs. But in general, you want to have some kind of budget for weekly. You want to have some kind of joy fund budget for, hey, I really want to get this hot guy. Let me take a chance on this. And you have to have something at the end so that you can have the hammer. So those are the three things to really account for, and it's going to be different for everybody, different for every single league and format. But again, it's weekly, it's joy fund, and the hammer at the end is the way I see it. So, anything to add to that, Patrick? Do you have anything specific that you hold on to for September, in particularly? And aside from that, how do you play it in terms of where you are in the standings? Are you playing FAB differently if you're at the top, in the middle, or at the bottom?
Not really. The point, as far as I'm concerned, is to keep improving and keep trying as long as you can, however you can. I might be a bit more aggressive if I had a mid-pack team halfway through the season or a little earlier, because I'd want to try to make a move and stay in contact with the teams at the top. But I'll keep trying the whole way. I know we're probably going to break out into that discussion. And there's one thing you did mention that caught my ear and I thought was really important is you have to calibrate your bidding to the amount you have in your budget. A $1 bid, a minimum $1 bid in a $100 budget, that's the equivalent of bidding 10 in 1,000, and you can't, break it down into the decimals as easily so that you can make these little tiny bids and still succeed. So you have to be very circumspect in how you bid because those dollars add up pretty quickly. And my guest on Baseball HQ Radio this week is Paul Sporer, who's I think in second or third place this week in the Raz Slam Draft and Hold League. It had 2 FAB periods, and I asked him how he managed that, and he said he didn't spend a nickel in that first FAB period. And I asked him why not, and he said, I don't know where everybody is because it was in June. And the next one was at the start of July, and he said, I wanted to have all my money at that second threshold because that's when I have a better idea of what players in the free agent pool are going to be the kinds of guys I want. And I don't know if I bought into that, but he did have the advantage of having a really good team at the start of the season, and he didn't have any weaknesses that he could immediately shore up. So I think you have to take a lot of things into account, as you guys said. It's a balancing act between what you need, what you want to spend, how much you want to save. There's a lot of buttons to push, levers to pull, and if you want to be successful in this game, I think you need to learn how to push those buttons and pull those levers for sure.
Yeah. I mean, as you said, there's no one size fits all answer on how you do it. But hopefully, and hopefully with listening to the show, and as we present the concepts, you're able to take the general concepts that we give you and fit it to your specific circumstances, because it's going to vary. Even for Ariel Cohen plays different leagues different ways. I mean, I'm in a head-to-head points in Tout Wars for the playoffs. I've got the most FAAB, and I want to keep it that way. I've got $200 more than the next person. But I know I'm rolling into the playoffs. I'm in first place. I've already clinched. I'm going to hold off the next couple of weeks and spend not more than $3 and then just hoard it up for the end and make sure I get that player. But if Ruvain and I, we're in another league where we're really trailing, anybody who looks like they have any upside, we're going to spend a lot of money on them to get them because we have no shot other than that. So, Ruvain, I'll give you this question first. Do you change your player acquisition strategy during the month of August in terms of the type of players that you're going to pick up and the holes that you're going to fill?
Well, again, you mentioned about the standings, and I think the standings do play into it very much when it comes to deciding who you're going to pick up in August. First of all, if you're from like sixth place and down, I think you should be extremely aggressive and spend, if you think you have a hole to fill or you think you can gain a couple of points in a couple of categories, those are the target players you should go after. Because if you don't spend the money now, what's the point in having the hammer if you're in seventh place and there's 2 weeks left in the season? Nothing's going to happen. You have to be more aggressive now. You have to go after those certain players that you could see, okay, listen, I need saves. If I get 2 saves gives me 4 points, but if I get 5 runs, it'll only give me 1 point. You go after the saves guy. You don't go after the guy who's more likely to get runs. So I think that's the way to look at it. But it comes down to the standings, and it comes down to playing time. Playing time has changed across the board, so you have to really watch for that also.
Yeah, that's always, the playing time is always something very key to look at as we get down the stretch. For you, Patrick, August and September, how does the types of players and what you're looking for in a player that you're getting off the waiver wire, how does that differ from the first 4 months of the season for you?
Well, I'm going to build on what Ruvain said, and for me, it's a spectrum right from the start of the year to the end. At the start of the year, I'm looking for any player who's better than any player I already have, and I'll spend accordingly, and I'll try to calibrate what bid I need to get a player like that at that time, knowing what I know about my competitors. We've been in the league together for several years, so that's a help. It's not like a NFBC where you're in a different league every year. You don't know the guys as well. But as the season moves along, I get more and more focused on where the categories are that I can gain and lose. And Ruvain made a mention of there's no point in spending money to get a guy who's going to gain you 5 runs. If 5 runs doesn't gain you any points or only 1 point, whereas if you could get 5 saves, that would get you 5 points. So you got to focus your money and you got to focus your attention on that category because that's where the opportunity lies. And I would also add, you need to be looking behind you to see if you're in a tight clump with 3 or 4 other teams that are breathing down your neck in one of the categories, home runs, RBIs, whatever, then you need to be constantly aware of their presence and be ready to react when you see an opportunity to make a move in that regard. And just as an example, in the Tout American League only, I was pretty aggressive going after Curtis Terry, the DH in Texas, who was having a tremendous year in AAA, and they finally called him up. He's been off to a slow start, but I'm within a couple of home runs and maybe 10 RBIs of picking up 5 or 6 points. And if Curtis Terry can get me any kind of production, and the guy he replaced was getting me no production, I think that's money well spent. And it turned out I spent probably $20 more than I needed to spend, given the second place bid, which they present to you. But I didn't mind because I knew I wanted to get Curtis Terry because I thought here is a player who can help me in categories where I can really make some hay.
Yep, and the term that we use on this show for categories that are tight are large gradient. When you have a large gradient in a category, and it doesn't really even matter whether you're on the top or bottom, right? If there's a category where if you have hit 3 more homers, you gain 4 points, that could do it. It could also be a category that if you didn't have 3 or more homers, you would lose 4 points. That's also a tight gradient. So it doesn't matter where you are. It's where the marginal numbers in between the player teams in a certain category is all very tightly bunched, tightly gradient. That's the categories you need to really hone in on and go for in the free agent market. We're going to now take a break to do some trivia. Time for the Injury Gurus Trivia of the Week.
Well, because we're talking about FAAB and pickups and everything like that, one thing we have to talk about is roster churning, because we have to keep churning that roster, trying to pick up the right guy for the right time and the right price. Now, this year, I'm going to talk a little bit about the injuries. This year, so far, there have been 827 players placed on the IL. 126 of them were due to COVID, so that means about 7, as of this date, as of the taping, 701 players have been placed on the IL this year, which makes the season for the season on pace for 1,050 IL stints for this year. The trivia question for the week is, it was higher. This is a higher rate than last year. In 2019, there were 667 players for the entire year on the IL. Are we on a higher or lower pace than last year, than 2020? So what do you guys think? Or is the MLB on a higher pace or a lower pace of IL placements for this year compared to 2020?
But compared to 2020 or 2019?
Yes, compared to 2020. 2020 was a 2-month season, so I'm going to be extrapolating for a 6-month season.
Okay, and we're not counting COVID. We're actually counting real injuries?
We're counting real injuries.
I am going to say, and because it seems obvious that we're on a higher pace this year, I'm going to say last year.
I'm going to say we're on a higher pace for hitters and a lower pace for pitchers.
We are on a lower pace than last year. If 2020 would have played out and everything would have gone the way it was, 2020 we were on pace. MLB was on pace to 1,272 IL stints. This year, like I said, we're on a pace for only 1,050. So people think, injuries are up, but I think injuries were actually worse last year. And actually, if you notice, the injury bug has slowed down a bit now. But then we bring up the question, and I'm going to pose this to you, Patrick. Do you churn your roster more often or less in the final 2 months, and do injuries play an impact in that? And how does it play an impact?
I don't deliberately churn my roster at any greater or lesser speed at any time of the year. The choices I make about player movement onto and off of my roster and trades in leagues that allow it are strictly based on the need at the time, and that's constantly variable. And I would say I've been playing this game since the early 1990s, and I can't ever remember saying I'm going to do more towards the end. I will say that I've been in leagues where I could make moves, especially trades, and I'm first, second, or third. Then there's a lot more attempts to make moves, but they don't always succeed. I would put it that way, that it's not a time thing, it's a context thing, and it just so happens that that context that urges you into more action tends to take place later in the season when you realize, hey, I've got a chance to win this thing or to make the money or something like that. So it depends on where my team is, how my team's doing, where I can gain, if I can upgrade weak links, as I said before. The worse I'm doing in the standings, by contrast, the likelier I am to make some moves as well in a different direction. It's more natural because I have weak players on I have more weak players on my roster, so there's a bit of pressure that way. I've got more bad players to replace, so I try to replace them. Then if I have a good team, it's usually because I have good players and I don't need to replace them. But there's a certain amount of aggressiveness that's highly contextual.
For me, I think that for hitters, I'm churning less in the final 2 months. I'm churning more early on because, we're talking about $1 players at the end, and I don't know, I'm churning until I get the guy who I think is going to hit. Or I'm churning and saying, all right, this guy's good schedule this week, this guy's good schedule this week, and if the guy is good, all right, let's keep him. So I'm doing some churn for roster discovery. Pitchers, I think I'm churning more later in the season because I'm playing matchups. I'm trying to get the wins. I'm trying to fill in the holes. I find myself churning more in the pitchers. What about you, Ruvain? Do you find that to be true?
I think it's based on how your roster is actually constructed, because if you already have this speed guy on your bench that you're able to plug in all the time, or whenever you need to try to get those stolen bases, then you don't need to churn your roster as much, because usually people are chasing steals or stolen bases toward the end of the season. If you have that power guy and you have that steals guy on your bench, usually for hitters, you don't need to churn as much unless you can pick up, let's say, a Joe Adell, who's actually only owned in 56% of CBS leagues right now, which is crazy. Joe Adell, who's batting 375, you want to try to spend the rest of your budget on him and hope he gets you the stolen bases, hope he gets you some power as well. That's great. But I think for hitters, you usually at this point, you know what you have, you know what holes you have, and you don't have to churn as much. So a lot of guys, especially from my teams that I have, I'm waiting for guys to come back from injury as a hitter. As the pitchers, whole different story. You want to try to get the next saves guy. You want to try to get those 2-star pitchers. So I think the pitching end of the roster gets churned a lot more in the last 2 months than the hitting side.
So here's a question for you, Patrick. And, along with picking up players comes the question of dropping players. Obviously, it's all going to be an opportunity cost situation, which guy is going to help you more. But how do you decide who you're going to cut? So, take example, maybe there's somebody underperforming, or even Jacob deGrom. I saw some really good NFBC players where there is no injury list, there's no IL slots, and they're saying, well, goodbye deGrom, I'm cutting you. He's a top player, he's a top pitcher, and, they made the decision to cut the best pitcher on the planet, even if he's only going to pitch 3-4 more starts. How do you decide when to drop players in the last 2 months of the year?
It's a really interesting question, because the pressure is on you to make those decisions correctly, because you have fewer weeks left to make up for a bad call that you might have made. So I think you have to be very circumspect in making decisions like that. I've talked with other people about would you drop Jacob deGrom, and of course it's very league rule dependent, as you suggest. I know in NFBC you have 7 reserve slots, and I think I might be tempted to put him on my reserve, because even if it's only 3 starts at the end, they're probably going to be pretty good starts. And the kind of starts that can really move you in the categories, even if it's only a handful of starts, especially compared to what you're going to get from a pitcher who you got out of the free agent pool. With some exceptions, there are certainly guys who come out of nowhere and start to look really good. But for me, the key question, I think, is who is the replacement that I'm going to put into the slot? And can I convince myself, or can I see a path forward for the replacement to be an improvement on the guy dropped? And I'm thinking of a situation like we saw in Oakland, where the situation when they got Starling Marte, all of a sudden, this applies at the major league level as well, because Starling Marte arrives, all of a sudden, if you've got Stephen Piscotty, Seth Brown, Tony Kemp, any of these guys on your roster, I think you really have to start thinking long and hard about looking elsewhere, because they're not going to play as much. They're just not going to play as much. You're going to lose a lot of playing time. And then you have to start looking in your free agent pool and saying, if I would have held on to Stephen Piscotty because the situation hadn't changed, what kind of player would I have been looking for? And now that threshold has dropped, because he's going to be playing 20 or 25% less often. Now I can look further into the pool to see if there's somebody who I wouldn't have considered before, but now I'm going to, because the situation at the major league level has also changed. So you're always looking for that. You mentioned opportunity cost earlier, but there's also an opportunity when you have these kind of situations where a guy like Seth Brown or Stephen Piscotty is not probably a fundamental player on your team and never has been, but up till now there was really nothing you could do about it, depending on your league format and how deep your free agent pool is, to do a replacement. It now gets easier in a sort of paradoxical way to replace Stephen Piscotty, because he's not Stephen Piscotty that he was the day before the deadline as far as our expectations.
So, let's talk about the specific circumstance of deGrom, because I think it's interesting. This is an NFBC format, so 7 bench players, no injured list, right? Obviously, if you have an injured list, you put him on there. It's no brainer there. What situation would you have to be in on your team that would suggest to you, well, there's got to be somebody better than having DeGrom, and I'll cut him. I mean, does it take all seven all seven bench spots to be injured? Is it somebody who's in last place that just can't wait for any production? Like what situation would you have to be in the NFBC to say that's it for DeGrom?
Well, if it were me, the only situation I can see is you're worried about the possibility that he might not come back at all, and your opportunities in the categories are in wins and strikeouts, and you can't afford to have a spot dedicated to somebody who's not going to start every week or twice a week. And I think you might want to take advantage of the opportunity to churn through as many pitchers as, Ariel, you said earlier that you like to do towards the end of the season, trying to get those two-start guys, trying to get a pitcher who's got an easy start during a week and try to rack up those counting stats on the pitching side. Having said that, the question is, if I put DeGrom on my reserve list, who do I have to kick off my reserve list, and what is the likelihood that they're going to be contributors in a greater way than he is, even if he only gets a handful of starts down to the end? And you may have injury concerns in your main roster, pitchers or hitters, and some of the guys that you have in reserve are kind of backfill for those possibilities. There's a lot of ways I can see where a legitimate fantasy manager could look at the situation and go, I can't afford to swallow this risk. We think he's going to come back for 3 games, but nobody said anything about it for sure. It's a forearm elbow type of situation. That's very worrisome. If the Mets should happen to fall out of the race, they have no reason to bring him back early, and they want to get him ready for 2022. I think it's a risk-benefit calculation. That's your line of business, Ariel, so maybe you can talk more about that and more intelligently than me. But I think that it's one of those kinds of things where, as we've said multiple times here tonight, it's contextual, and sometimes good players make tough decisions.
Yeah, I mean, certainly shallower leagues, if you're in a 10-team league versus a 15-team league, well, the replacement level is a lot better, and having no, and if you have a lot of injuries that guys coming back, and for whatever reason, you need the expected production. Yeah, let's say you're in first place, you just want some expected production. You don't know what you're going to get with DeGrom. You might get 2 starts, you might not. If you're in a shallow enough league, then get somebody off the waiver wire and contribute to the wins and strikeouts. Otherwise, you might get a 0 or much lower. That type of situation would be tough for me to say dropping DeGrom, though. I mean, it's such an expected production. Even if you think he'll get 3 starts at the end, it's such a high expected production at the end that you would say.
Okay,
just take
well, then how about this? What about Clayton Kershaw? He's in the same boat. Clayton Kershaw's been shut down. You don't know when he's coming back, and you don't know if he's going to come back. That's the whole reason why the Dodgers went out and got Max Scherzer. What about Tony Gonsolin? He's been shut down. You don't know when he's coming back. He's a lower level. I think he's a guy you'd be more willing to cut, but people have been holding on to him for a while to get production out of him. But let me give you a list of some other guys. And what would you do with these guys? Dinelson Lamet, Noah Syndergaard. If they're on your roster and you have them down as starters, they've been both told that they're going to be most probably working out of the bullpen. You have them, but you don't have them for the same reason why you got them or drafted them for. So they're not going to be starters. They're going to be relievers. Are they going to help your ERA and WHIP? Not as much. I mean, they'll help it, but they may not help it as much as a top middle reliever that's on the waiver wire right now. And what about Ranger Suarez? He was the closer in Philadelphia. Now he's a starter. Do you want him starting for you, or would you rather have him in your bullpen? Do you want to hold on to him for that reason? I guess you do, but you cannot start him anymore. There's some jobs have actually changed in the last couple of weeks, and we have no clue. Now, there are certain guys you can 100% drop. Anthony Rendon, hip surgery, he's done for the year. Tyler Glass now, he's done, he can be dropped. So there's some clear-cut cases, but with a lot of these pitchers, you don't know when they're going to come back, and you don't know what their job is when they're going to come back. Because what if they bring back DeGrom, and what if they want him in the bullpen because they don't want to, extend him? They want him to pitch only 2 to 3 innings. Is he still worth it? I think so, but you don't know. And then lastly, going back to Fernando Tatis, we always talk about him. He's injured. What's going to happen with him? We're going to find out in the next couple of days, hopefully, how his shoulder's reacting to the rest. But if they say he may come back toward the end of the year, but they're going to rest him for a couple of weeks, I guess you hold on to him, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions there. I mean, I'll let Patrick ask some of them, but Tatis, that's a wait and see. You don't want to make any decisions until you have the information here. With Syndergaard and Lamet, obviously it's more of a drop, especially if you're counting on them for the wins and the length. You can probably find better production. Who's the other guy in the middle that you mentioned?
Ranger Suarez was a closer for the Phillies, and now he's a starter. They're putting him in the starting position.
Yeah, as long I haven't really looked at him too much, but just in terms of the theory, yeah, if he's going to get more innings now, he's probably more valuable. Unless you really need that saves role there. It's just it comes down to all such different questions. But hopefully that by listening to some of the answers we give, you'll be able to get some general guidelines and make the decisions for your team. And before I turn over to Patrick, funny you should mention Tyler Glass. Now, I had just picked him up a couple weeks ago in Tout Wars. Tout Wars head-to-head, we have by a semi-weekly lineup, so you can set all your pitchers half a week for only a couple of days, twice a week. And I had an empty slot where I knew I wasn't going to get any production out of a pitcher slot, so I said, you know what? Let me put in a $1 bid for him, just in case I have him for playoffs. Who the heck knows? I get Tyler Glass now for nothing. I have unlimited IL in Tout Wars, so for $1, what the heck? It's different in every league. Any thoughts on all those questions, Patrick?
Well, there's a couple of names that popped up that I actually did have to make those decisions on. I had Dinelson Lamet. I actually dropped him once when he first got hurt. I picked him back up on FAAB about a week or two before he looked like he was coming back, and then I've dropped him since because it just doesn't seem like it's working out. And as Ravain said, there's a decent chance that he comes back. If at all, he's going to be in the bullpen where he's pretty much no help to me whatsoever. So I've moved on and grabbed somebody else, and the somebody else I grabbed was Ranger Suarez, because I thought, well, at least I'll get some saves. And I got him a week beforehand, so I got him for $1, which was, I thought, a really good deal, because I just thought that was how the close saver situation was going to work out. Little did I know that they'd acquire a closer through the trade market. And I don't even think he's going to be a starting pitcher in the traditional sense. I think it's likelier that he's some kind of opener, which is the worst role you can have for a pitcher, because he just gets out there, gets to face the lineup once and get hammered around by the other team's best hitters, and then somebody else comes in and gets the win. If they had said he's going to be the bulk guy after the opener, I might have been more interested. But as it was, as soon as I heard that news, Ranger Suarez was on my see you later list.
Yeah. Let's just talk about category movement. Patrick, what do you find that are the categories that can be fixed, or you can gain or lose points? What are the most volatile categories as you go through the season? Which categories on the other side are more locked in that it's harder to make any movement late?
I don't think there's a hard and fast answer to this, but I would like to make a certain point, and that is I know a lot of fantasy players who think you can't move a lot in the ratio categories at this point in the season because the denominators are so large. And I can tell you from experience, and I can tell you from having done the arithmetic, that that's not true. And there's 3 reasons that it's true, because if you do it right, you can gain by adding a positive value player. So if you pick up in trade or off the free agent pool a better batting average player or a better ERA or whip player, then you're going to gain that way. You also gain by removing the negative value player whose spot he takes. And the teams you're chasing, unlike all the other categories, the teams you're chasing can move backwards towards you if they have bad weeks or bad months. So I think that we really need to be aware of the fact that we don't need to give up on those ratio categories. And I'll give you an example that I just ginned up with a 1,000-inning league. So let's say you have 700 innings now, 300 to come, and your ERA whip looks like 425, 120. You drop Jorge Lopez, he's a 5 ERA 155 whip guy. You lose, you go down, you improve by 4 ERA points and about 2 whip points. You add back a Zach Wheeler or a Charlie Morton, you go down further. It's really easy to move 2, 4, 6 points in those, not points in the count in the standing sense, but go from a 4.25 ERA to a 4.18 or a 4.14 ERA. And in a lot of leagues, that's enough to get you some points. So don't overlook the ratio categories because you think the only place you can gain is in home runs and stolen bases and those kinds of things. And as far as those counting categories, I think you just have to look at it and say to yourself, how much do I need to do to catch up with the guy in front of me, keeping in mind that he's moving too. You know, if you look at the guy in front of you and he's 7 home runs in front, and you think, well, if I get a guy who's going to hit me 7 extra home runs, I can get that point. No, you can't. Because meanwhile, the guy in front of you is also going forward. So you actually need to improve your lot by basically as much time as there is left in the season added on to as a percentage of or prorated to the amount of the lead that the guy has in front of you. And you have to do that arithmetic. You have to sit down and figure it out. Use projected standings, use projected category standings, and look and see, do I really have a chance to make a move in this? And I have more to say about this, but I'm interested in what Ruvain has to say.
Yeah, well, I think ratio categories are still extremely volatile. I have a team that has Kevin Gausman and Kyle Hendricks, and they both happen to have bad starts last week. I lost a total of almost 6 to 8 points in my. I had a lead, and I'm now in second place. It's a team I'm with Ario with, and we were in first place by like 10 points, and now all of a sudden we're in second place down by 2 points. So yes, those ratios can still move. They can move either way, and usually if you pick up the wrong 2-star pitcher, they usually move in the wrong direction. That's why you have to be very careful. So you have to be very selective in who you pick up and who you stick into there to make sure that your ratios don't get blown completely if the ratio statistics standings are so close together. Because again, everything is contextual to the league and how you're doing. Basically, if you're bunched all together, there's in a certain category, you have much to gain and much to lose. As for the counting categories, it's a little hard to gain. I think it's harder to gain in the hitting categories or the counting categories. Sorry, the counting categories, because if you're so far behind, like let's say you are 15 stolen bases behind, do you think picking up 2 stolen base guys in the next 2 weeks and you get, let's say, 2-3 stolen bases a week, you're not going to catch that person. If you're not going to get those, you're not going to get those points because that other team is still getting stolen bases. It's not like those teams just stand still while you're gaining those points. And that's what everyone has to keep in mind when they're actually trying to catch in certain categories.
Yeah. Well, about the ratios, very different than the counting categories. I mean, if you're 20 runs behind a player, behind a team, if they have a bad week, they're not losing any runs, right? They're not coming back to you. Whereas in ERA, the best possible chance you have to catch somebody is not you doing good, it's them bombing. If they throw a couple of 10 earned run starts in a week, boy, it's going to be really, really close. I mean, Ruvain, we're in a league that we're playing in, and we just gained about 7 points in the ERA and WHIP categories together, just from everyone bombing, and we had a couple of good starts. So those are actually very fixable. The low quantity numbers are more fixable. So wins, saves, even stolen bases are fixable. Stolen bases, you have to remember that there are more stolen bases in September than in the summer, right? If you compare July to September, because of call-ups and everything and expanded rosters, at least in the old days, it was even bigger expanded roster. You have a lot more stolen bases. So that is more of a catchable category. RBIs and runs that have, indices in the couple of hundreds, they're much harder to catch. But yeah, the ratio ones are actually one of the easier ones to catch. That's definitely true. And, the question is, Patrick, talking about league engagement today. This is our engagement episode. Is it too late to win a league if you're in last place? The answer, I think, is in a roto league, pretty much no. You're not going to be winning if you're in last place. If you're in the middle of the pack, you still have a shot. But if you are somewhere towards the bottom of the league, do you think there's an ethical or moral obligation for you to play as tough as you can, even if you're just technically not going to win?
Well, to address the first part of the question first, I think that if you're in last place, your chances are virtually meaningless. And the issue is, it's not how many points you have, it's how many other teams there are between you and where you want to get to. And the intellectual exercise I recommend is just think about it as in every category or even in the overall, give yourself a 50% chance of catching the guy in front of you and toss a coin. And if it comes up heads, you get to move up past that guy. But now you have to keep doing it, and you have to keep getting heads. And the laws of probability tell us you have a 50% chance of getting that first guy, you have a 25% chance of getting the second guy, and so on up the list. And by the time you get to having to make 14 of those jumps, your chances are 31 in a million, as the way I've calculated it. And that's assuming that there's 50% chance of doing that, and oftentimes there isn't a 50% chance. Your chance is actually lower. But however you calibrate the amount of chance you have to catch each guy in turn, you have to multiply them together to understand what kind of chance you have of making a big move. I would suggest that at this stage in the season, you probably have to be no lower than fifth, and you'd have to be a pretty competitive fifth in the overall points category. Otherwise, I wouldn't like my chances of succeeding. What was the second part of the question? I forgot.
Well, the second part of the question is in terms of ethics. You're out of it. You're in ninth place, and you have no way of winning. But do you have a moral or ethical obligation to try as hard as you can?
You do. I'm absolutely unequivocal about that. It's just, I'm going to use the word sportsmanship. I know it's not gender neutral, but it's the word that I'm the most familiar with. I'm older than a lot of people listening to this call, I'm sure. But when you compete in good faith in a league where you're expecting all your competitors to also compete in good faith, you're letting everybody down if you don't compete to your fullest ability from beginning to end, regardless of how you're doing. I mean, when you watch the Olympics, as the Olympics are on right now, and you see some of these competitions where there are clearly athletes in some of the running races or swimming races that have no chance. They don't have programs in their countries, or they just sent the one person in the country who even knew how to swim, or those kind of situations, and they have no chance. But they don't step off the track partway through. They don't climb out of the pool halfway through and say, I'm not going to finish. Sportsmanship, good ethical sportsmanship, demands that you try as hard as you can right down to the very last day. And by the way, I've said this before on my show, and I've said it before just talking to people. Figuring out and learning how to go from 10th place to 9th place is going to pay you dividends in one of these seasons that comes up where you're trying to figure out how to get from second to first, because you've done it. You've worked the standings, you've worked the rosters, you've worked the categories, and you know how to move up. And moving up from 10th to 9th may not be as big of a deal as second to first, but if you do get that work in now, it'll pay dividends in the future.
Let me ask you this question, Patrick, because it's a complicated issue. There are some people who play in 20 leagues. I don't. I play in 7. But some people who play in 20 leagues, and in terms of a draw on their time, they're trying to win money. Let's say they play in the NFBC and they're trying to win money. It would be unwise if they have 5 hours to do FAAB to spend equal amount on every league. They're going to be smarter, I would think, and spend a lot more on the leagues where they have a shot to win the money, and much less on the ones they don't, even though it obviously affects the standings and the ratios for everybody else. But of course, in their mind, they're playing for money. And even if you're not playing for money, even if you're in even if you're playing for a small amount of money, you're in a home league. Maybe you're in 4 home leagues. Maybe you decide, okay, you know what? I want to concentrate on fantasy football. I'm going to divide my time that way. It's over. Maybe you're playing with the same guys and you're playing football. Is there any thought to the fact that it is a draw on your time, and if you are in that many leagues, it's just human nature, and it's just unwise to spend as much time as you can. You should spend more time on the leagues that you have a shot in, and less on the others if you're going to be economical with your time. Is that an argument?
Well, I guess it depends, and ethical and moral choices are individual in nature, as we know. But I can tell you, I've been in that situation. I play in quite a few more leagues than I play in now. And what I found out as my life changed, I married, I got children, and the pressures on your time are exactly as you described them. But I did not stay in the same number of leagues and play some of them in a half-hearted fashion and just pick and choose the ones I tried to that were in the running for money or for glory or for a trophy or whatever the case is. What I did was, I think the ethical and sportsmanlike thing is, I went in fewer leagues, so that I went in as many leagues as I thought I could legitimately handle the workloads of, given everything else that's going on in my life. Because I think you're doing the game you're playing a disservice, your fellow competitors are being done a disservice, and the sport is being done a disservice if you just say, I'm going to enter 60 leagues in the hope that I can somehow manage my way to one victory. And then, especially if you then go around and say, look at me, I won one victory, and never mention the, the 25
Right.
or 40 leagues or whatever that you finished, 11th or 9th or something like that. I find it a little dishonest, and I certainly find it not very ethical insofar as the sportsmanship of it is concerned. If you can't manage 20 leagues, given the time constraints in your life, then play in 10 or play in 8 or whatever. Because as you said, there are other guys in those leagues who are trying to win money, and your inactivity is contributing to them possibly not doing that, despite the fact that they are trying really hard. But you're sitting there not doing your roster. You're sitting there and losing ground in the categories. And maybe, I know I would be very angry if I was first and on the very last day of the season somebody snuck by me to win because some third party who didn't even participate for the last 4 weeks had somehow not handled his team enough to let that second place guy get one last home run to sneak in front for an extra point. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about here. So I think you have an ethical obligation to, if you're going to play in the league, play it to the end. And if you can't manage it, then get into fewer leagues.
So, Ruben, let me ask you this: does it differ the ethical and moral obligation in terms of how you play? So, part of playing is setting legal lineups. Is you don't play players that are injured, but you can spend a lot of time in the waiver wire and say, well, this guy's marginally better than this guy, so I'm going to put him in here. I'm looking at the categories, or you can at least set your lineup and make waiver wire pickups to handle injuries. Oh, this guy's injured. Okay, I'm going to go in the waiver wire and pick him up. If you're in 15th place, okay, I'll at least pick up guys who are not injured, but I'm not going to spend that much time. Do you think there's a difference in terms of just setting legal lineups and fair lineups versus really going all out in your mind?
No, I think it's the same thing, because a lot of teams who stop going in and picking up players from FAAB because the teams are out of it, they're not setting legal lineups, and they're letting their lineups go illegal. And sometimes it gets to the point where teams don't reach. There's a threshold for innings or at bats, and they don't reach it because of these injuries, and it screws over the entire league. That's happened to us in a couple of leagues, and I don't think that's fair. And so that's why there is an obligation for someone just to continue. Listen, if you're at a baseball game and let's say you're watching, I don't know, let's say the Mets, and let's say they're losing, I don't know, 9-1 to the Phillies over the weekend, and you're in the stadium and you're there. Do you leave in the 7th inning, or do you hold out hope and think they're going to come back? Are you one of those guys who stays to the bitter end? If you're one of those guys who stays to the bitter end, and you're one of those guys who keeps churning the FAAB, keep changing your roster throughout the entire season, even if you're still out of it. Another point, though, is if you keep watching for the last 2 months and you're out of it, and you keep churning and you're looking at the rosters and you're looking at the waiver wire and you're seeing what's going on, you can start to see trends from the end of this year to the beginning of next year. And you can actually see, oh, wait, the last 2 months of the season, I picked up this guy. I remember that. He took off for me the last 2 months of the season. Maybe I should be on him next year. And other teams may not know about him because you were on him and you saw him develop. And I think it's actually a positive thing for you to continue to keep setting an illegal roster, to continue to go after the FAAB. Now, there are a lot of times also when the top teams in the league, when they go into the FAAB weekend, they'll say, you know what? I don't think this person's going to bid on this guy because he's out of it. That's not fair to that team. They should think that they're going to have some bid on someone also as well, because that's not fair. You can say, you know what, I don't think he's going to bid on it, so I'm going to bid $1 and I'm going to get him for that. But if you keep everyone honest, and that's if you keep playing FAAB and you keep setting lineups, you're keeping everybody honest, and I think that's the best way to go.
Yeah, I mean, I don't consider myself extraordinarily moral or not, and I don't even know if I'm doing this correctly. What I do is, I'm playing, as much as I can. I do give more of my time to the teams that I have a chance, and a little bit less. But I do play it. I mean, if I have $300 in FAAB, I don't care if I'm in 15th place. I'm using all $300. If it's the last week of the season and I'm out of it, I'm using all $300. That's not to say I'm going to spend that much time on that. If I'm playing in 7 leagues, I know the players pretty well, so I know, all right, let's look for this guy, look for this guy. Oh, he's available in this league. Now, 200 on that guy for the last week. So I won't go crazy in terms of my time, but I'm going to play it right. I never have a situation where I'm putting injured players in the lineup. Never have a situation where I don't make any FAAB at all. I'm always putting some of my time, but I am playing more for the leagues that I think I have a chance. I hate those teams that if they're out of it, they don't play anyone. And you ever have the innings minimums? 1,500 innings minimum, and all of a sudden one team doesn't qualify, and because of that, somebody jumps up in the standings. I think that's terrible. I think you have an obligation to make sure you hit every single minimum, and there should be penalties. I mean, the truth of the matter is that not everybody is going to follow this moral ethical code. If you did put in incentives, if you have the payout structure up and down, even in 9th place, 10th place, you get $10 more, $15, $20 more. I think that adds a little bit more commitment to say, okay, you have to spend some amount of time because you might get an extra $10, $20, $30 out of it. Where you put no incentives, human nature is to just totally collapse. So, again, I always think you should spend some amount of time, always make sure that you are doing something fair, but I don't see any reason that you can't spend more time on the places that will help you more. I mean, you're playing the game, so does everybody else, and it's your right as well. So
I actually have a question then. If you're a commissioner of a league and you see a team is not meeting not setting a legal lineup, as a commissioner, you see they're not going to get to that innings minimum. Should you, as the commissioner, set a legal lineup to make sure that team gets to the innings limit?
Well, I mean, if there's no rule that's in there, then I don't think you can. But and as a commissioner, I've nudged people. I've sent out reminders with a month to go. Excuse me, your lineup, you're not on pace to meeting the innings requirement. Please pick up somebody and play them. That I've sent. Well, what do you think, Patrick?
I've been in that situation too, and that's what we ended up having to do was just remind guys, hey, you're going to come up short of the innings, so you need to add a couple of pitchers or at least replace the 3 guys on your roster who are hurt and that you haven't done anything with for a month, those kind of things. And then as soon as you can after, you have to convene some kind of league gathering and get rid of that player because you don't want to have a player like that unless you can get some kind of guarantee that kind of performance won't be repeated. But I can tell you right now, if they'll do it once, they'll do it 100 times. I think that's inevitable. We had an idea in a home league I played in once because we were running into this trouble. And you talked about incentives. And what we did was we changed the order of the minor league draft. We had a farm draft every year, which was really important because it was a keeper league. And so the draft used to be 12, 11, 10, 9 to 1 for that draft. And we thought, well, we're rewarding people for tanking and going down to 12 spot. So we changed the order from that to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 through 12, then 4, 3, 2, 1. So there was an incentive insofar as improving your team in the subsequent year's farm draft by trying hard to move up in spots. And then we also had a system, we called it the loser lottery. And everybody at the start of the year had to throw $50 into a pot. At the end of the year, the 11th and 12th place teams didn't get the $100. They lost their $50 deposit. Everybody else got it refunded, and then the 5 through 12 teams had a lottery draw for the $100. And the higher you were in it, the more chances you had in the draw, the more ping pong balls you had in the draw. So there was a double-sided incentive. If you finished 12th or 11th, you lost $100, $50 each. And you had the lowest chance of winning the lottery pool, and the guy in 5th had the greatest chance, so there was a double incentive there. And I'm telling you, it really worked.
Yeah, but I think it's pretty simple. I mean, instead of if you have a 10-team league and you have $100 in a league and you're going 700, 200, 100 for top 3, just take some out of it. Make it 500 for the top and 200 for the next and 100 for the next and 90, 80, 70, 50. You can scale it all the way down to the end and make it $20 for the next spot, $20 for the next spot. There's always some way to put some incentive. Is the point. But even if there isn't, you should be playing. This is why we play the game. Be considerate of your other fellow league mates. It's about sportsmanship, as you mentioned, Patrick, and consideration.
And considerate scouting for the next year. That's all.
Yeah. All right. Time for Waiver Wire. It's where we're going to the segment where we mention a couple players that you might want to pick up this week. Let's start with you, Patrick, who are a couple players that you might want to pick up this week on FAAB.
Okay, I'll start with a pitcher. I thought there's going to be some opportunities with the COVID news about Garrett Cole and Jordan Montgomery on top of the previous injuries affecting Domingo Germán, Corey Kluber, Luis Severino, Michael King. It's been a real disaster in the Bronx. And I think you might want to gamble on some potential replacements in that rotation. The bright, shiny object is Luis Gil, who had a terrific first start, but my pick is left-hander Nestor Cortez, who has more than 100 big league innings, not too impressive in the past, but 193 ERA, 095 whip this year, 39 strikeouts in 32 innings, a ton of ground balls, and a really low barrel rate. I think Nestor Cortez could find his way into that rotation, and say what you will about the Yankees, they're going to score runs, and their bullpen's pretty good, so you might want to take a look at Nestor Cortez. On the hitting side, I know a lot of people are looking at Rafael Ortega of the Cubs, who's getting some opportunities with the departures of Schwarber and Rizzo. I think he had a 3-home-run game just a few nights ago. Joe Adell got called up this week, and he has a great pedigree, but a miserable track record. So my pick is Detroit catcher Eric Haas. He's the AL Rookie of the Month for July. He won't be available in a lot of leagues, I understand that. 946 OPS, 9 homers, 29 RBIs in July alone. And he gained a channel to increased playing time when Jake Rogers went on the IL. He has a forearm injury. Career slugging rate in almost 300 plate appearances in the majors and minors, 474. I know the ship has sailed in a lot of leagues, but if he's available in your league, take a good long look at Eric Haas.
Yep. And Cortez is a Nando DeFino special. He mentions him. He's mentioned him the whole year, so definitely good pick. Ruvain, how about you?
I'm going to go with a couple relievers and a first base outfield guy. First of all, the two relievers I want to mention, I can't believe he's only 27% owned in CBS, and that's Andrew Kittredge from Tampa. He's the possible main closer there right now since Diego Castillo was traded. Even if he doesn't close, he's gone 51 innings with 52 strikeouts, a 1.4 ERA, and a .9 whip. Now, you tell me that's not going to help you with the ratios, then you have to be crazy. He was an all-star. He's one of the people that you don't even think of him as being an all-star, but he was an all-star. He was just that good, and he's available in a ton of leagues. Another guy who I'm going to mention, and no, it's not 2012, but I'm going to mention Tyler Clippard. Tyler Clippard led the Nats in saves in 2012 with 32. Right now, he is the de facto closer in Arizona. He's got 2 saves so far in 6 outings, 6 innings, 4 hits, 1 walk, 5 strikeouts, only 12% owned in CBS. You want to take a stab at a closer? They almost traded him, but they didn't trade him. You know what? He's the closer there right now, and I think he's available in a ton of leagues. Another guy who I'm going to mention, who I mentioned before in this pod, and that's Darren Ruff. Now, Darren Ruff, last couple of weeks, last 7 games actually, he's batting .375, 2 homers, 5 RBIs, 1 stolen base, 4 runs, eligible at first and outfield. He's only 7% owned. Now, Brandon Belt was activated from the IL earlier today, which means he may not get as much playing time in the infield, but he's hitting so well that they'd have to find some time for him somewhere. He has 86 career home runs in Korea with the Samsung Lions. He only has 52 career home runs in Major League Baseball for his entire career, but he's a guy who has power. He can get you the occasional stolen base, and right now he's hitting for average, so he's a guy with only 7% owned in CBS you can pick up.
And Tyler Clippard, you also get a pair of his glasses if you pick him up as well.
Those wraparounds, yeah.
Dylan Floro of the Marlins, only owned in 16% on CBS. I know Bender got the save today, and I have Bender in a lot of leagues, but Floro, that's a pretty under-owned percentage there. He had 2 straight games of the closer. I would pick him up. Spencer Patton, 5% owned on CBS. He might be the closer. He has 27 strikeouts in 20 innings, 3.15 ERA, 1.15 whip. That sounds like an instant pickup if you need saves. I'll mention 2 other hitters. How about Rowdy Tellez? Still only 20% owned on CBS. He's hot. Since joining Milwaukee, listen to his triple slash. 340, 438, 660. I would pick him up. He has 5 homer in about a month's time. 5 homers, 16 RBIs. That's a pickup for me. Yadiel Hernandez, 6% owned on CBS. He's in the last 2 weeks. He's hitting .545, 2 homers and 7 RBIs. His triple slash on the year, 312, 372, 459. But here's why you should pick him up. Now on Washington, he's batting 4th or 5th every day. I don't care if you're on the worst team in all of baseball. If you're batting cleanup on a lineup, that's going to get you a lot of RBIs. And if you have a over 300 batting average and you're batting in the middle of the lineup, that's a ton of RBIs. So because of the spot, Yadiel Hernandez is going to be great for the counting spots. Under-owned at 6%. All right, pitcher preview. That's where we highlight a possible good key matchup. 2-star pitcher next week, or maybe stash a pitcher, and he's a future 2-star pitcher. Go ahead, Patrick. Who is your pitcher pickup for this week?
I just wanted to say I grabbed Spencer Patton a week ago as well, so that's a good call. He's already got me a saver too, so I'm glad I did that, and I encourage everybody to look at Spencer Patton. My pitcher preview for this week is Sean Manaea of Oakland. He's having a terrific year. Of course, the first time in several years I don't have him on any roster. 326, 117, 27% K rate, just 6% walks. And listen to these starts for this week. Kansas City and Texas for the week coming up. Texas is second last in baseball in WOBA versus left-handers. Kansas City is 20th overall. If you're looking for a slightly cheaper option, or maybe somebody who might even be in your free agent pool in a shallow enough league, Adrian Hauser of Milwaukee has Tuesday night, I think, against the depleted Chicago Cubs, and then Sunday at the previously depleted Pittsburgh club. Chicago 20th in WOBA versus right-handers. Pittsburgh is 27th. Hauser pitched against Pittsburgh earlier this week and had a truly weird result, 6 1/3 no-hit innings, but 5 walks and 1 earned run. He has pretty decent numbers overall, a 3.55 ERA, but don't be looking for strikeouts. He's only got 80, I think, in 48 walks, something like that, in his less than 70 innings, I believe, or 65. I'm not sure. But anyhow, he walks too many guys and doesn't strike out enough. But when a guy's going into play the Cubs and the Pirates, you got to be interested.
Yeah, and those starts are away at the more of a pitcher ballpark, so it's a good call on that. Ruben, how about you?
I actually have 3 pitchers that I'm interested in. Usually I'm not interested in 2-star pitchers, but 3 of them actually pique my interest. First of all is Paolo Espino from the Washington Nationals. He's scheduled to have 2 starts this week at the Mets, which he actually shut them out for 5 innings on June 28th at Citi Field. And he's pitching again at Citi Field. He's got the one, and Citi Field is one of the lowest runs per game in stadiums in the entire MLB, and the Mets are just not hitting, so he's perfect for that. The second game is against Atlanta and Drew Smyly. You know, the Atlanta lineup, you don't know what you're going to get with that. Both those games, you're probably, the Met game is actually against Carlos Carrasco, so you don't know how long he's going to go. So both of those games, if Espino can just outlast the opposing starter, he can actually get a possible win. He's only 7% owned in CBS, so he's a guy to look for. Another guy who, if you're willing to stomach him, then it's very possible you can pick him up, and that's J.A. Happ. He was traded to the Cardinals. I'm not sure why the Cardinals even got him because they're not really in the race, but they traded for J.A. Happ. His last 3 starts, his ERA is 9.64. That scares people away, but he's scheduled for Pittsburgh and Kansas City, both at Pittsburgh and Kansas City. So that's a guy you may want to think about going after, especially the WOBA numbers that Patrick just mentioned on some of those teams against lefties. They don't really hit that much. So J. Happ, if you really want to, if you can stomach it, then he's a guy you can go after. And a guy really, really, really deep. This is really deep. Carlos Hernandez of Kansas City. He was in their bullpen until recently. He's made 2 starts so far since he became a starter, both of them against the White Sox. He won both of them, 11 innings, 10 strikeouts, 6 hits, 1 run. That's pretty good. Now, the starts are not that great. It's against the Yankees and against the Cardinals, both at home. But so far, Carlos Hernandez, his K rate in the minors, it was between 9 and 10 for 9 innings. He only has a 34% hard hit rate, and his fastball is 97 on average, 97.7 this year. His slider is 86. He's got a curve at 82. He's only owned in 3% of CBS leagues. So you want to take a dart, this is the perfect dart to use on.
So I don't really love the pitchers for this week, but a couple just to talk about. Drew Smyly, 40% owned. He gets Cincinnati and at Washington. Not terrible. Atlanta can score, so if he goes to 5, you never know. Alec Mills, only 15% owned, so he could be available in some deeper leagues versus Milwaukee and then at Miami. That's not a bad start. And how about, I can't believe I'm saying this, Matt Harvey. He gets Detroit and then Boston, so one decent start, one not. Since July 18th, he's made 4 starts. He's pitched 22 innings. Can you guys guess how many earned runs he's given up in those 22 innings?
2, I think it was.
Yeah, 2.
I was going to say 2, yeah.
0.81 ERA since the All-Star break, 0.72 whip. I don't know. I mean, it could all go to hell very quickly, but, do you want to ride the bandwagon if you're desperate for starts? You might. So, Matt Harvey, just be aware of what he's doing. All right, injury update, Ruvain. Go for it.
Well, let's start with Matt Harvey. He actually left his last start with a tweaked knee against the Yankees, so just be careful. Make sure he is healthy enough to make those starts when he comes up next. I mentioned Fernando Tatis earlier in the episode. He's on the IL with left shoulder inflammation. They said they're going to wait about 10 days to reevaluate him. Surgery is still not off the table if he doesn't improve in those 10 days. He was able to recover 10 days before, so we'll see how that goes with that. Joaquin Soria, the other former Arizona Diamondback closer, was picked up by Toronto. He's on the IL with right middle finger inflammation. We don't know how bad it's going to be right now, so Jordan Romano and Brad Hand should continue to close for the Blue Jays. Domingo Germán, he's on the IL with the right rotator cuff strain. We don't know how bad it is really. I mean, we know it's a strain, but that's it. He's going to be shut down, no throwing for 7 to 10 days, and then be reevaluated then, so we'll see how that works out. Kevin Biggio was placed on the IL with neck and back problems. We don't know how bad it is, but the Blue Jays are hopeful that he's able to come off the IL at the earliest available on August 13th. But someone who was activated in his stead was Corey Dickerson. So if he's available in your league, he's already starting to hit, so he's a guy to pick up. Another guy who's been pretty good is the guy who's been filling in for Kevin Biggio, and that's Santiago Espinal. He's not that owned in a lot of leagues, and he's been hitting for a pretty good average. Chris Paddock is on the IL with a strained left oblique. He injured it during a bullpen session. We don't know how long he's going to be out for, and they don't know who's going to replace him. And that's going to be it for this week. Hopefully, over the next couple of weeks, all we'll see is players coming back, because as September gets closer, you're going to start to hear a lot more players get shut down for the season, and hopefully it'll give you more clarity on who you can drop and who you have to pick up for.
Yep. Now, great update. Patrick, thank you so much for coming on the show. Always a pleasure to have you. It's always a great show. We get into some moral and ethical ground, and it's really great to hear your take as one of the greats in the industry. I always think that you have reasonable, very analytical way of approaching things, and always the high moral ground. So thank you so much for coming on the show, Patrick.
Oh, it was my pleasure. I'd just like to wrap up by saying don't be sleeping on Detroit's offense. They're scoring runs these days, and if you've got a guy going into Detroit and Boston for a 2-star week, I might give Matt Harvey a pass even if he wasn't hurt. And Ruvain mentioned Jay Happ. I listened to his argument very carefully, but I have decided I shall remain hapless.
All right, so there's Patrick, who shuts down our suggestions for the pitchers this week. But that's great. We love that on the show. I mean, we want differing opinions, and like I said, I wasn't really happy with these pitchers this week. I'd much rather put some middle relievers, especially if you're close in ERA. Don't chance it. Just fortify your ERA. Obviously, if you are really down and desperate and need it, then those are guys to give a shot. But yeah, point taken about Harvey and Happ though. For that. And again, thank you so much, Patrick. Well, before you go, why don't you tell us where we can find you, where we can reach you, and all things Patrick Davitt.
My Twitter feed is at Patrick Davitt. It's Patrick like the saint in Ireland, Davitt, all one word, all lowercase, but I don't think that matters. The Baseball HQ Radio podcast drops every Friday afternoon. There's a post-trade deadline special edition that came out on Saturday earlier this week. So if you want to have another set of analyses of the trade deadline for fantasy purposes, you might want to check into that as well. The podcast is available pretty much everywhere. I'm not doing a lot of writing at baseballhq.com, but I will be doing some research-based writing later on after the season is over. So if you're a baseballhq.com subscriber, keep an eye peeled for that, because I've got some pretty good, interesting research ideas that I'm going to be addressing. Thanks, you guys.
I have to imagine that most people listening to our show have heard you on the Baseball HQ Radio. And for those who don't, Baseball HQ Radio is really the gold standard for podcasting. It really is. Patrick gets the best guests on every single week. He goes in-depth around the league. There's surprise pitchers. There's just so much in there. If you haven't checked it out, it's an absolute must. Ruvain, how about you?
You can follow me on Twitter at MLB Injury Guru, where I tweet out all these injury updates, how long I think they're going to be out based on my medical opinion, and who's going to be up next. I also have a weekly article on Rotoballer that comes out every Saturday discussing who's going to be injured, who's next up, and helps you with your FAAB every Sunday.
All right, and I'm Ariel Cohen. You can find me on Twitter at ATCNY, my work over at Fangraphs, Sportsline, and Rotoballer, and of course you can listen to me right here on the Beat the Shift podcast each week. We're getting to the home stretch. We'll do these strategy sections as much as we can to help you get set through the end of the year. And waiver wire, there's still time, as we said on the show. If you're in the middle of the pack, don't worry about the standings, the ratios. Don't be daunted. You can make it up. Hope the other guys just decline and stick to your guns, and you've got a moral and ethical obligation to do so, as we've dictated on this show. All right, once again, thank you so much to Patrick Davitt for joining us in the show, and from all of us here at Beat the Shift, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.